Hi all, welcome back. Today we're going to do an overview of the turbulent 60s with a focus on the civil rights era. The decade is massively important. America takes in more events than it can comprehend, than it can deal with. It's a intense, packed decade, right? Particularly beginning in about 1963. So we'll talk about the civil rights. We'll look at different historical interpretations of that, and then get into a bit on the hippie movement, starting with the beatniks, and some fun stuff in there that you're going to find interesting. All right, so nothing to it but to do it. Let's get started. Okay, traditional interpretation of the civil rights movement is that it begins in 1954 with Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. Okay, that signal super important Supreme Court decision that desegregated schools. There's some blowback to that, but the federal government intervenes, forces desegregation on the South. Then after that, LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act shortly after. And all is good. Uh, Pretty much. Now, in this story, too, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, is prominent. They take center stage, and that's the story of Martin Luther King and the white pastors, the Big Six as they're known. Typically, the story ends with his assassination. At the same time that we have the first African American appointed to the Supreme Court, the Supremes, and the first woman elected to Congress. We're starting to see blacks voting now. We're seeing inner city districts starting to seat black candidates. And the narrative is the movement then achieved its goals. To the point that we're seeing extremism in that movement. Those African Americans who didn't get the message, apparently, that the war was over is the subtext to that. So life's not perfect for African Americans in the U.S. now. That's understood, but by this point, right, things have changed dramatically. The civil rights movement, it has achieved its goals. And yeah, we're all in the 70s watching the Jeffersons, and we know the American dream now really has no more firm color bar. Anyone can move on up to the east side. Okay, so let's review that narrative before we expand on it or try to nuance it. And we should say there's some truth to this for sure. The civil rights era sees massively consequential change. And a big part of that is Thurgood Marshall, the chief attorney for the plaintiffs in the landmark Supreme Court Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. Now, Thurgood Marshall is representing the NAACP, the National Association for Advancement of Colored Peoples. They've been around since early in the century, and they have a legal defense fund that has launched dozens of court challenges against segregation, increasingly doing so throughout the 1940s and 50s. Now, Marshall successfully argued that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, which led to that unanimous decision in 1954 of the Supreme Court that overturns the separate but equal doctrine of that 1896 court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson. That's the one that affirmed that this individual named Homer Plessy could not ride in the white-only train car. Homer Plessy had been picked to test this law, this segregation law, because he was effectively white. He was fractionally African American and looks completely white. But the 1896 decision was that his 14th Amendment rights to equal treatment of the law was not violated. Because, and here's their thinking back then, he had an equally good blacks only train car to ride in, right? So, in other words, segregation is permissible as long as separate facilities existed for white and black people. So the court now in 1954 is saying no, that separate is inherently unequal. Right? And why is it inherently unequal? Well, it shouldn't be hard to think of why that would be. And the answer is because it creates a badge of inferiority. Okay? For example, a black school would never have public standing equivalent to a white one in a culture where blacks are seen as inferior and treated that way as inherently so, right? So this is hugely consequential, especially as you can imagine in the South. So 1954 is an absolutely explosive decision, and it explodes in the South. 1957, famously, you get the Little Rock Nine. These are 9 African American students who are exercising their new right to attend the public high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, the Arkansas governor vows that they won't, and in fact, he sends the state militia to keep them out. Eisenhower then has to send federal troops to escort them in. And so what we get is this media circus confrontation and these famous pictures, which tend to focus on poor Elizabeth Eckford here, who never got the message that the meeting point to walk in of the 9 got changed. So she shows up all alone to these angry white racist she devils that you see in these pictures here. It's like a scene from The Walking Dead or Twilight. The thing is, though, as historians, we have to do better than that, right? And what we're really seeing here is the level of fear. Right, so think about living in a society where everyone has always known their place, and where you know, because everyone knows, that if the blacks get in the door, soon enough they'll get access to political power, and everything in your world would change, right? And not for the better. So they believed the simplified narrative of Reconstruction, that corrupt black politicians had made a mess of city government, of county, of state, that corrupt politics had followed the African American vote. Okay, so this is something that's really important to understand about that white reaction. In any case, Elizabeth Eckford, she makes it out all right. You'll be glad to know. But yeah, just brutal. And you can be as clueless as you want. You see this on TV news. It's hard not to know who's the real threat here. And the thing is, another point is to get back to that concern that the white South has about Reconstruction, about every politician then being corrupt, and this is where we're headed again. As we know, and as I covered earlier in this course, they're wrong. Most Southern politicians in the Reconstruction period were corrupt. There's absolutely no color test for that. But yes, their days of control are over, and they sense that. And you see that very starkly in the Arkansas elections for governor, the gubernatorial maps. As you see here in these maps at the top left of our slide. So the very top left is 1962 Arkansas governor election. And blacks are not voting. And of course, every county votes for the racist Governor Faubus. Now, his party, of course, is the Democrats, which in the South has been the party of white supremacy consistently since the 1870s. Now, look at 1968 then. This is the first election after the Voting Rights Act. So here's the one right beside it. This is after equality is forced on the South. And what you see here is that the state Democrats, they lose their 90-year hold on power. They lose out to a progressive Republican named Winthrop Rockefeller. Familiar name? Yeah, he's the grandson of Standard Oil's John D. Rockefeller. A little bit of irony there. But he gains enough of the small enough of the white vote that, along with the black vote in Arkansas, he can overturn this Democrat hegemony, this 90-year hegemony of white supremacy. And then he oversees the complete integration of Arkansas schools. So notwithstanding what Faubus had promised. You get the same thing in Alabama, though you wouldn't know it as, it's nowhere near as quickly because segregation there is much more culturally embedded and is a tougher fight. This is where Governor George Wallace makes his famous stand in the university doorway. That's in 1963. And you can see him on our prior slide. I didn't talk about him, but he famously bravely stands at the door of the University of Alabama and gives that now famous promise to prevent African Americans attending. And he says, segregation yesterday, segregation today, segregation forever. He's a little bit wrong on that, but at first you wouldn't know it. Alabama is a tougher fight. Alabama has about 3 million people in the 1950s. 1/3 of them are black. 1 million of them are black. Significant percentage. And if they got the vote, yeah, look out. But for a long time, they can't. There's a 1950 map. This is the bottom left there. That's the gubernatorial election. and you can see that, or you don't see there, but the Democrats get over 91% of the votes. They take every county. The same thing in 1946, same thing in 1942, 1938, all the way back to 1870, this kind of dominance. The only time you would see some color on the map, and in fact, in one year, the Democrats took 100%, another year 99.7. The only time you see some color on the map is when you have an independent populist tries his luck. So not a Republican, but a populist. And that's kind of interesting, not super important, but the populists here, like in all of the South in this long period of time, were the small-scale farmers. They're the poor white working class. And they challenge the so-called Bourbon Democrats. Okay? The Bourbon Democrats are the land-owning elite. Unlike in Arkansas, though, after the blacks start voting, little changes after in the 1960s. And that's because pretty much all the whites here are still voting for Wallace. And that doesn't change till 1986, which is my map there on the right. Okay? So all the whites are still voting for, pretty much solid blocks still voting for the lost cause of segregation, even though it's a dead letter. But through the next 20 years, there's a slow burn of a growing Republican vote. And then finally, the Democrats lose out in 1986. First time in 114 years, the Democrats lose that state. So this really matters. This tells us that the vote eventually does overturn these longtime racist parties in the South. Now that change is mirrored in presidential elections, which you'll see there on the far right. On the left side, in case you haven't had enough voting maps now, anyway, on the left side you see the rural black belt of Alabama. On the right side you see how this is where Obama picks up most votes in 2008. So this is the 2008 election there on the right side, presidential election. Very defined black belt in the center of Alabama. So yeah, that middle, the middle map there, sorry, is where you see the vote on whether the old Confederate battle flag should be removed from state buildings. So a plebiscite on that in Alabama. And this is in 1999. So whether the Confederate battle flag should be removed from state buildings. Whites, no. Blacks, hell yes. Okay, so interesting. So these Alabama maps here, they really show a dying old South, the end of white control. And this is exactly what that generation feared. But there's a lot more to the story, of course, a lot more that forces the change in what happens on the education front. And before that showdown in Arkansas and Alabama, you had the famous Montgomery bus boycott. Now, to clarify, this was a year-long campaign against segregation on Montgomery, Alabama's city buses. And it started on December 5, 1955, 4 days after the arrest of Rosa Parks for refusing to give up her seat to a white man, as you, I'm sure, know. But what you might not know is that this wasn't some random arrest, that this was staged, much like the Homer Plessy incident in 1896. And it had been staged by the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. Now that chapter of the NAACP had been looking for a test case to challenge the constitutionality of the Alabama state bus segregation law. And Parks happens to be the local NAACP secretary. So she volunteers and she does the deed. Then, when she's arrested and goes to trial, a group of local leaders, these women, they organized a boycott. So it's a grassroots, very much a grassroots thing. Now, it so happens at the same time, Martin Luther King, all of 24 years old, has just started his first job as a preacher in Montgomery. And also so happens that he's known Rosa Parks for years because both of them had worked for the NAACP. Now what he does is he comes into the picture by organizing an extended boycott that builds on what the woman had already organized. And to do that, he forms this organization of mainly of black pastors in Montgomery to do this. And they call themselves the Montgomery Improvement Association, the MIA. Super important because this is the nexus. This is exactly what then will become retooled as the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, in 1957. Which will be the main organizing group of the rest of the decade. And they will organize all those famous campaigns that you may have heard about in Selma, in Birmingham, and all the rest. And here's a really key point. What Martin Luther King and all these black pastors are really good at is making connections with white liberals who also finance most of these campaigns. So that is a really key point. They can build bridges with white liberals, white America, and this is what funds most of their campaigns. As for the bus boycott, well, it works. The boycott means that all these African Americans in Montgomery, who are the main users of the bus system, are now walking their carpool and using taxis. It's an amazing thing, and it works. But it works. The city caves not just because of ridership, but because the boycott organizers are also working the court system, and they get a decision that in their favor that segregated busing was unconstitutional. In any case, this becomes the model for nonviolent protest. Super important for that. And another key point here is a woman by the name of Ella Baker is on the ground floor of all of this, the ground floor of this new MIA and what becomes the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957. In fact, she helps organize that conference in Atlanta that established that new organization following the bus boycott. King is the president, and she's the executive director, their first and only staff person. So she served as a grassroots organizer, though later on she will quit the SCLC to spend more time guiding the formation of something that it in turn branches out to form, which is its student arm, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which will grow further and further apart from the SCLC. That's 1960. SNCC is known as SNCC, okay? SN, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, why I mention her is she represents really where the movement is heading. Also, though, really importantly, a division in tactics, because she's not on the same page as MLK and the other black pastors. She's really about equipping blacks to take charge. Okay? And she sees a weakness in the strong male leader model of the SCLC, and the charismatic leader, and she's famous for her really memorable quip, which is, quote, "Strong people don't need strong leaders." Now, the lessons of Montgomery carry over into the next big success, which is the Birmingham campaign. Now, this is just a few hours, just 100 miles down the road from Montgomery. And so again, it's Alabama. Again, it's Martin Luther King. And again, it's the SCLC. And again, protesting segregation in what King calls the most segregated city in America, which is why it's being targeted. So it's sit-downs, it's marches, it's targeting stores and theaters and restaurants. And also, it's got a broader aim, which is to get the white business community to end its practice of white-only hiring policies. And thankfully here, you have this guy who looks like he comes from central casting for the role of backwater bigot, and that is the white supremacist Bull Connor. He plays right into the role that the SCLC wants. He is the city's commissioner of public safety, and famously he has the police use high-pressure fire hoses and attack dogs on these peaceful, nonviolent protesters, including children. So this makes for really great television nightly news viewing. It disgusts most Americans, and it puts a lot of pressure on Washington to do something. Now, in the same state in the same year, added pressure, you've got Governor Wallace taking his famous stand in the schoolhouse door and sending those National Guard troops to keep black students out, and then President Kennedy reversing Wallace by ordering the troops to stand down. Meantime, you've had the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms, and that's its full name. This is late summer, and the whole idea and the planning for this is on this gay black leader, Bayard Rustin, whose name doesn't come up nearly as much as some of the others, but he's in the background, and he is King's closest advisor. Not well known either that King almost did not deliver that famous improvisation, the "I Have a Dream" part, the one that you all know. But Mahalia Jackson is here. Mahalia Jackson, and the gospel singer, and she's in her early 50s at this point. King's told her of his vision, and she says, tell them about the dream," and he does. Now, what matters enormously is not just that there's over 250,000 people here, but this is the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. So that is really so consequential. The setting is completely appropriate and so meaningful. You're right here at the Lincoln Memorial on the 100th anniversary of his emancipation of the slaves, and basically asking for, you know, the fulfillment of that promise. Now, all of this together in this very short time period gives the White House a lot more leverage to act. So John F. Kennedy, he gets behind a Civil Rights Act, which will end up being passed by LBJ Johnson after Kennedy is murdered in Dallas. At which point there's enormous goodwill to pass it because of that as well. So the Civil Rights Act, what is this about? And it's not that Americans need more laws. We already got the 13th, we got the 14th, we got the 15th Amendment, we have the Enforcement Acts, we have the 1871. We even have a Civil Rights Act in 1875. The difference is, and the reason it's needed, is this Civil Rights Act has teeth, enforcement. For the first time, there are federal penalties and a whole enforcement agency to oversee them, the EEOC. And so this is really a heads up. It's a notice. Employers, retailers, restaurants, theaters, they are put on notice. Look out! This will be enforced. Okay? So segregation seems to be, seems to be on the out, and 100% the federal government is behind it. That said, the South is still very good at keeping blacks from voting, and as we talked about, and many are illiterate, so they cannot register to vote, and so because of that, we also get what's called Freedom Summer of 1964, or the Mississippi Summer 1964. And what this is this campaign to register African Americans in the state that is most notorious for voter suppression, which is Mississippi. And it's a whole bunch of agencies. It's NAACP, it's SCLC, it's CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and it's not met without violence. In fact, this is when you have the infamous triple murder of 3 volunteers: James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman. Very famous event that is the crux of 2 films, In the Heat of the Night and also Mississippi Burning. But out of this summer, you also get this Federal Voting Rights Act. Okay, so Civil Rights Act, now a Federal Voting Rights Act. And between that and the Freedom Summer students, by 1966, a majority of Mississippi blacks are voting, which is a whole lot more than basically none a few years before that. So this is so huge, and the reason it really is, the reason this is such a massive game changer, is really simple. You have to be a voter to be on a jury. Okay, so think about that. The days of the all-white juries in the largely black states are now effectively over. Okay, and this is really that really important difference from the 1950s. In the 1950s, you could see Emmett Till casually murdered because the murderer knew he would be exonerated by an all-white jury. This happens as late as 1963 when Medgar Evers is killed by a bullet to the back in his own driveway, and simply for being an NAACP activist. And he's killed by a Klansman who everyone knows he did it, but he escapes conviction twice with all white male juries. Right? You also have these murders I just mentioned of Goodman, Chaney, and Schwerner, who they also got off, and it's not till 2005 that one of them does time for his role in this. So yeah, it is a massive game changer, this short period, and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Act. And we see the success of this movement too, Freedom Summer, in the dramatic return of African Americans to politics. And you can see that in the graph here, from effectively no African American legislators in 1964 to hundreds by 1992. Okay, Fenema, so you've given us a pretty tidy explanation here. Civil rights movement, one and done, and and we're good to go. Let's all go eat some potato salad and be happy. Well, not quite, right? And the struggle goes on, and that's important. And it also predates all of this, right? So I want to introduce these two authors to you here because they represent this early turn away from that original narrative, that original historiography on the civil rights movement. And the traditional interpretation is that it begins in 1954 with Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision, right? Integration of schools. And then, yeah, there's some blowback, but then the federal government intervenes and it forces desegregation on the South. And then LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act after, and it's all good. Now, in that story too, in this narrative, the SCLC is prominent. It is front and center. So it's a story of the success of Martin Luther King and the white pastors, the Big Six as they are known. Okay, now Stephen F. Lawson and Charles M. Payne challenge that by giving us two side-by-side narratives. Okay? The traditional, which they call the view from the nation, and the grassroots, which they call the view from the trenches. And the former is exactly what I just gave you. The latter involves more attention to things like women in the movement, more attention to SNCC, divisions, and the more radical students. Now, Tyson, a great article here by Robert F. Williams, about Robert F. Williams by Timothy Tyson, and he's written a book about that as well as a few books, and there's one of them, Radio Free Dixie, but great article by him called Robert F. Williams, Black Power and the Roots of the African American Freedom Struggle. He starts the more nuanced approach by showing that the civil rights movement does not start in the 1950s. It's starting well before the war. And again, it's grassroots, and the SCLC comes on board later. So yeah, this is really important, and we're more apt to see, and as I teach African American history, I'm always reaffirmed in the fact that really the freedom struggle is one continuous thing, right, from Reconstruction onward. Originally an abolition struggle, then a struggle for freedom, to actualize that freedom that was given. Today, there is still yet more research. Where's the historiography going? Well, today it looks more and more on how segregation operated in the North, as well as in the South. In the North, it operated through things like redlining through banks and government programs that favored whites and kept blacks in certain areas and kept them from getting mortgages. Okay? Or actual covenants in neighborhoods, which became illegal but were still operating right after World War II. In our times, it goes on in what is known as gerrymandering. Okay, and if you don't know what that is the practice of drawing electoral district boundaries in order to dilute the voting power of a racial minority group. Well, that's not its stated goal. Its stated goal is to boost the vote for your party. So it can work the other way too, what I just said. In the case of the Democrats, you want to maximize the black vote because they tend to vote Democrat, so or the minority vote, right? So that's gerrymandering, is reorganizing districts to the voters in any given area so that you can, in any state, so that you can guarantee your vote or maximize your potential. And it's crazy what happens, these crazy weird maps that are drawn in order for that to take place. It's actually quite astounding. Now, there's a key Supreme Court decision on gerrymandering that said racial gerrymandering is illegal, and that is Shaw versus Reno, 1993. And they ruled then that this bizarrely shaped district violated the 14th Amendment. Okay, so there is that, but then the Supreme Court more recently has been stacked with conservative appointments, and in 2024 the opposite decision was made to Shaw versus Reno, and this decision allowed South Carolina to move 50,000 white voters into this black majority district 100 miles from where they lived, in a very clear move to contain the black vote. So in other words, the fight goes on, and the historiography and the freedom movement goes on, and much of it focuses right there on the African American vote. Super consequential. Now, what we also pay more attention to now in the historiography and African American civil rights movement is a continuity. And central to that wider, longer story of continuity is the role of the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. Now, this was founded in 1932 already to train labor activists and civil rights leaders. It's a coaching school to train labor activists, to train people in activism. And it's established by a man by the name of Miles Horton. Miles Horton over there, you see his image there. His inspiration is a Lutheran movement, but more so it's the writings of theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. And in fact, he studied under Niebuhr at the Union Seminary in New York. Right? And we've been introduced to Niebuhr earlier in the course. Super important theologian in the post-war period. Now, over time, Highlander is more and more focused on civil rights and includes among its students Rosa Parks and Septima Clark of the NAACP. Both of whom play a big role, and Septima Clark in the voting rights movement, and who ended up teaching here. Okay. Also, lots of members of SNCC, of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, take their training here. Martin Luther King took training here. John Lewis, the famous long-serving legislator, who big name in the civil rights movement as well. The school serves as a training ground for key civil rights activists like Rosa Parks and SNCC members. And it also, a significant program that comes out of this is founded by educator Septima Clark, who taught literacy and voting rights to thousands of African Americans in the South through what are called citizenship schools. Okay, so she hones her craft here and develops citizenship schools to teach literacy and voting rights to South African Americans in the South. Super important school. Now, the state of Tennessee, it's really a nexus for all these names, yeah, I really challenge you to look into it. It's a fascinating story. State of Tennessee attempted to revoke the school's charter in 1962 because of its advocacy for racial equality and its association with the civil rights movement. Claiming it's not really a school then. That didn't happen, and in fact they are still going to this very day. But the takeaway, the important point, is this is grassroots organizing that predates World War II, right? And some of those big names like Rosa Parks were longtime activists. Okay? That's the other point here, is that this is not simply organic happenings. Okay? Her bus movement her moment there in Montgomery on the bus and the boycott that follows, this is not the start. And it's not something that just happened. It's planned. It's something she's been training for. Ella Baker, too, longtime activist. She's been in the background for decades organizing before becoming SCLC's director and before establishing SNCC. Okay? So this is what we increasingly see, that yes, there is a thing called the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Yes, it's a watershed movement, but also it's part of a struggle that's been happening for a long time, right? And it hasn't ended. Now, something you'll notice too, and historians have, and I'm not being original in pointing this out, but it came to me really in a profound way after teaching African American history for years, is that really all of these leaders eventually are kind of saying the same thing. And as much as there's division in the African American civil rights movement over the years and in the decades, there still is this coming together in that one point that came to us in that great quote by Albert Hubbard, and all voices in the movement agree on this one thing. Now, Hubbard was this well-known American socialist philosopher, early 20th century, and as he said when writing this Booker T. Washington biography, he said, "Freedom cannot be bestowed, it must be achieved." Now, he died not long after that, unfortunately, because he sailed on the Lusitania, which was torpedoed by a German U-boat in 1915, and he died in that famous event. But that profound idea has resonated, right? That freedom is earned, not given. Freedom it's not a gift, but it's a continuous process of struggle and achievement. And if it's handed down, if it is given, it can as easily be taken away. That's the flip side. And that is the lesson of the post-Civil War Reconstruction period and why Reconstruction failed. Equality was bestowed by the winning side. And when it was inconvenient, the federal government walked back those freedoms, that equality, those civil rights, and so did the courts, right? And so really what the 1960s is a time of reclaiming those. But again, everyone in the movement is headed in that direction, regardless of how far apart they may be on strategy. Okay, so that is what I wanted to leave you with, and you can dine out on those quotes a bit. They're all great ones from these great leaders of the movement over time. And yeah, thanks for listening. Any questions, let me